Boom. Welcome to the Social Ninjas podcast. I am your co-host. Join with me as always, the other co-host, Jeremy. What is up?
What's up, Kyle? What's up, everyone listening? And a special hello to our guest today. Kyle, who's our guest today?
Our guest is Tana Amen. What is going on, Tana?
Hi, thanks guys for having me. I'm honored to be here.
We are honored to have you as well.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Social Ninjas. So, can you give us a little background on yourself and what you do?
I can. So I'm the vice president of Amen Clinics. We are mental health clinics. We've got soon to be 9 clinics around the country, and we look at people's brains. So what we do is a little bit different. We, rather than just prescribing a medication for everything, we want to see what's going on in your brain. So if you're anxious, why are you anxious? If you're depressed, why are you depressed? Did you have a brain injury? Do you have hormonal imbalances? You know, if you're acting crazy, what does that even mean? Do you have Lyme disease? Do you have, I mean, there's so many things. It's like saying that, to give them the diagnosis of depression is like giving the diagnosis of chest pain. Chest pain can be caused by a whole bunch of stuff. Well, depression can be caused by a whole bunch of stuff. Anxiety can be caused by a whole bunch of stuff. And so we like to look at people's brains. Now that sounds really creepy, but it's actually really cool. And so it tells us a lot about people's behavior. So the brain and behavior are just, it's fascinating. We did the big NFL study, and we have over 300 players. And that was really cool to see that not only can you see when something's damaging the brain, but there's hope for it to get better. And so my husband and I both write a lot of books, and I just finished my 10th one. I'm very excited about it. This one's very different from my other books. Most of my books are on lifestyle and nutrition, and this one is on, it's a memoir. So it's actually about overcoming chaos and trauma in your childhood. So it's called The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child, and I'm super excited about it.
Awesome. So what got you into, looking at people's brains and, doing all the stuff that you do? I know you do stuff with nutrition and all that. What got you into that?
So my husband is a psychiatrist. He's double board certified in child and adult psychiatry. And so we've got, like I said, these clinics. I've been with my husband now for 15 years. He's actually been doing this for a lot longer than that. I think about 30 years he's been doing the brain scanning. And so he discovered that what made him feel bad was that sometimes people would get better when you put them on medications, and sometimes they would get worse. And it always made him feel bad. And he's like, psychiatrists are the only medical specialists that never look at the organ they treat. If you broke your arm or you broke your leg and you went in to get treatment, they're going to take an x-ray. If you, use the example of gynecologist, but I won't use that with you guys because you don't go to the gynecologist, hopefully. But if you go to the cardiologist, the gynecologist, any other medical professional, they're going to take a CT scan if there's a problem, or an x-ray or an MRI, but psychiatrists don't. They guess. And then if they guess it wrong and you don't do well, then they'll try another medication. Hopefully that does okay for you. If it doesn't, then it ends up being the patient's fault. They get labeled with a personality disorder. And so what my husband discovered with doing brain scans, we use a process called SPECT. It's a type of scan. We can actually see brain injuries. We can see toxicity. We can see emotional trauma. You can see all of that in the brain, and it just tells you so much. And it gives you a treatment plan. It gives you a map. Now, along with that, of course, we take blood work and all these other things to figure out why. Why does your brain look a certain way? But it's really cool.
Wow, I want to go. You sold me.
Very fascinating.
So what does a typical brain scan look like?
So, you know what? I wish I had pictures to show you. That's a good question. You can look it up. We actually have examples of scans on our website. If you wanted to see examples of scans, it's really cool. But a healthy brain is going to have very even, symmetrical look to it. So the scans are colorful, but that's not what you're looking for. You're not looking for the color. You're looking for the symmetry. Is it all even and symmetrical? That's on the outside surface of the scan. Now, if you've had a brain injury, you're going to see a dent. It looks like a hole. Okay, that it's not actually a hole. People will say, "Oh, I have holes in my brain." No, you don't have holes in your brain. What it is it's decreased blood flow to the brain in those places. So let's say you had a head injury, you hit your head really hard. You may have decreased blood flow to that part of your brain. That happened to me from a car accident.
Wow.
Decreased blood flow to the front part of my brain on one side. And that's, the frontal lobes that's your judgment center. That's the executive center. So if you don't know that and your behavior is a little wonky, that might be something good to know, right? That, I actually hurt my head. I never lost consciousness, so no one ever told me that I had this happened. But when I saw my scan, I was like, oh, that's so weird.
So what kind of treatment did you get?
So we do, like I said, we try to do as much as we can, least toxic, most effective treatments possible. We are not anti-medication. We will give medication. If you're suicidal or you're acting really, really extreme, we'll give people medication in an emergency situation right off the bat. But really what we want to do, we're not anti-medicine, but we want to teach you skills. We want you to know what can you do. We are way more empowered to handle these situations and heal ourselves than we think we are. And so nutrition plays a massive role in people's brains healing. Nutrition, exercise, all of these things are so important. And with certain types of brain injuries, we will actually recommend, like for our NFL study, we will recommend that patients go into a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. And so it's really cool how it helps to heal the brain.
What is that?
It's actually, so you're breathing 100% oxygen under pressure. So my husband was in the Justin Bieber series with him, and he shows his in his YouTube series, he shows his chamber. He started sleeping in that chamber as a way to heal his brain. So it's very helpful. I actually have one at home. I love it. I go in there and meditate.
What?
It's like quiet space.
I want one.
It's super cool.
Do you have any centers next to Los Angeles by chance?
We do. Encino. Yeah. We actually
I'm going. We're going.
Yep.
I'm going.
Yeah, our Encino clinic it's very busy. I mean, obviously things have been quiet, but it's that clinic is really busy because LA is just, it's busy. We've got a lot of people with hurt brains. So yeah. But what's really cool is you can actually tell the difference between physical injury. So if someone had a head injury versus you can actually see the difference, or emotional trauma. So head trauma, like physical trauma versus emotional trauma, the difference is astounding. And with the scans, we can actually predict like 90% of the time the difference, which, think about a veteran coming home. That's an important thing. If he's had a blast injury, but he also has PTSD, really important to be able to see the difference. Otherwise, they all get the same treatment. Some of them get better and some get worse. So, and the brain of someone with emotional trauma versus someone with physical trauma, they look the opposite. So one's brain is sort of on fire. If you've got emotional trauma, your brain's like fired up all the time. So you're like overreacting to stuff. But if you've had a head injury, it's usually very quiet. You actually have underactive brain. So do you think they both respond to the same treatment? No.
No.
But they get the same treatment.
That's so cool. I like it reminds you like someone's sick and just throw them some antibiotics. I'm like, good.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can't give the same antibiotic to everybody. If they're allergic to penicillin or they've got something that doesn't respond to penicillin, you got to know what you're doing.
I had this. My toe was infected, and they gave me like an antibiotic, and then I was like, all right. And then it didn't work, and they gave me another one. They're about to give me another. I'm like, stop. Could you test to see what it is?
Right. Exactly.
So then they did, and they're like, oh, so yeah, that wouldn't have done anything.
Oh, and by the way, the whole time you were taking those antibiotics, you're killing all the good bacteria in your gut, and the gut-brain connection is so huge. If people's guts aren't healthy, one thing that we always work on the gut right away if somebody comes to us. If they're depressed, if they're anxious, if they're really struggling with their mental health. Because if your gut's not healthy, your brain will not be healthy. It can't be healthy. They're connected. You have a direct connection. And it's super important to have a really healthy gut if you want to have a healthy brain.
Wow. Kyle, I'm going to Encino, so if you can finish this podcast. Great.
You are welcome, both of you.
So I have two questions. One, I find it very interesting. So can someone have be experiencing anxiety or depression based off a physical injury? Is that what you're saying? And I also want to hear you talk more about the gut and mental health connection as well.
Yeah, for sure. So if you hit your head, often depending on where you hit it, if you had a head injury. So have you ever noticed some of these football players, everyone talks about how nice they are before they, get very far into their professional career. And all of a sudden they're being arrested, like over and over and over. Domestic violence, drugs, all these problems, DUIs. And it's really interesting. If you look at their brains, I mean, football is a brain damaging sport. It's not going anywhere, but knowing that is important because you can start putting people on brain like right away while they're actually still playing. You want to make sure they're doing all the right things, and educating these guys is really important. So if you hit your head, let's just say you hit it on the left side, the left temporal lobe, that's an area that if it's damaged can actually cause dark thoughts. It can cause, just very negative feelings, depression, anger, outbursts, things like that. If it's damaged in the front, that's the executive center in your brain. So you've got now, hi Annie. That's my husband. He's the one that does the scans. So the joy of working at home, right? So if you hit the front of your head and you damage the frontal lobes, that's the judgment center, the executive center in your brain. That is where you have the brakes that say, oh, don't do this, right? Or I should stop doing that. So that's your more thoughtful part of your brain, the more human part of your brain. And if you damage that, you can start to act a little crazy, right? You have impulsivity, lack of judgment. Those kinds of problems will show up. Now, what if you damage the front and the side, which is often what happens in football? So if you damage both parts of the brain, then you're going to end up with lack of judgment and negative, dark, angry thoughts that you can't stop because you've got no break. Does that make sense? So it's really important to know.
I love this so much because I feel like everyone has a completely different body, and I also I think psychologists when you prescribe anti-anxiety or antidepressants and stuff, the same stuff for everybody, it just doesn't fit like this.
Oh no, I could tell you a story. So it's actually in the new book that I wrote, my memoir. Took me a lot of years to get to the point of wanting to write it, because I think anytime you put yourself out there and you're vulnerable about your life growing up and the chaos and the trauma, you're sort of opening yourself up to a lot of criticism. But I finally decided it was worth it. So when I was in my 20s, I not only did I grow up in a really chaotic environment as a child, but then later in my 20s, I ended up discovering I had thyroid cancer, which kept coming back. It was supposed to be like a one and done surgery, you're going to be fine. That didn't happen. It kept coming back. And as a result, I had to drop out of school. I had to quit my job, and I had no money, and I had bankruptcy. And so all this was happening at the same time my hormones were whacked from the surgery, and no one really warned me about that. Well, I ended up in this deep depression, and I wanted to die. I actually wanted to kill myself, but I couldn't kill myself. So I knew I wouldn't kill myself, but I kept thinking, if a truck just hits me, it won't be my fault. And then it will just be over with, and I'm wasting oxygen. There's no purpose for me being here. And I was 23. I kind of had the world by the tail at that point.
I'm like, what happened?
Well, so then all of a sudden I go to the doctor. I want to die. Like, there's no point being here. And so he put me on the wrong antidepressant. So to your point, now I didn't know it was the wrong antidepressant. No one looked at my brain or actually did much testing of any sort. He just talked to me and then gave me a drug, which at the time, the hot drug happened to be Prozac. Forward many years, I learned about the brain scans. I'm actually dating my husband, and his line to me was, I never heard a guy say he wanted to see my naked brain. I'm like, you best line ever. He scanned me 2 weeks after we started dating. So I go to the clinic and I get a scan and I see the sleepy frontal lobes. And he says, oh, about the past, about, the depression. And he's like, well, did they give you an antidepressant? I said, yeah, they gave me Prozac. And he's like, there's a lot of antidepressants that would work really well for a brain like this that has sleepy frontal lobes. Prozac is them. That's not one I would recommend. He's like, how did it work? And I looked at him and my jaw hit the table, because Prozac almost ruined my life. I've always been a really anxious person, which is what drew me to your podcast and you guys. Like, I always was really anxious about everything. And all of a sudden on podcast, I was just dangerously impulsive. I didn't do anything. Consequences be damned. And I mean, it could have literally ruined my life. And so there's a big part of my book that's all about what happened during that phase. I mean, I was just out of control. So I'm just really lucky I didn't end up in more trouble like some people you read about. And you got to wonder, are they on the wrong medication?
Wow. Yeah, there's a psychiatrist that I know, and he didn't like the dark side of being a psychiatrist, just giving here's a medication, see you later. So he actually changed to more of he would do a hair analysis, and then he would
We do
prescribe
all of that.
he prescribed different vitamin supplements, and
Hmm.
he would test different food groups on your skin and see how much your skin reacts to the
Yep.
different foods, and they like stay away from this, and this. You have food intolerance to all this stuff, and I'm like, whoa.
So we have so we have 30 doctors that work for us, and then we've got several of them are naturopaths and integrative doctors. Like I said, we're not anti-medicine, but we are going to look at everything. We're going to get your gut healthy. We're going to figure out what your hormone levels, like what's going on. If you
Yeah,
have
orthomolecular doctor.
yeah. So we do all of those things. And so because it's the smart way to treat people, we want to get to the root cause. We don't just want to put Band-Aids over bullet holes.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's super cool. I love what we do.
I had a question. I want to hear a little bit about the relentless courage of a scared child.
So that, it comes out January 5th. And it really talks about, when you're writing a memoir, a lot of things happen. It's, first of all, it's hard for you to write. But when you do, it's really positive. It's really awesome because you end up getting this adult's perspective to things that were really hard as a child. And so you begin to understand things differently. So it's very healing. But it talks about the trauma and the chaos of growing up, in a home where there was a lot of addiction. Thank God my mom wasn't an addict, but she was a 16-year-old runaway. And so she dropped out of high school, and so she worked 3 jobs just to, make ends meet in our house. And my uncle was murdered. I have one uncle who was a heroin addict, and my other uncle was murdered because of that in a drug deal gone wrong.
Wow.
And so, so that uncle had to carry the uncle who was a heroin addict carried a lot of guilt for a long time until he figured it out and turned his life around. He's an amazing human now. But then in my 20s, like I said, I ended up having cancer. My life sort of went off the rails when I was put on prozac. And so there's a whole story to self-induced trauma and how do we overcome some of those things? And what does medication have to do with it? So, but ultimately the theme in it is really overcoming, not being a victim to your circumstances, feeling empowered and using whatever the past was about to better your life. And another theme in there is it's easy to call people bad. It's harder to ask why. Behavior is complicated. So I go very deep into the addiction issues with my family and how it made me very judgmental, to say the least. I was very judgmental about people who use substances for a long time because of the pain that it had caused in my family. And then I began to realize through the lens of what we do at Amen Clinics, I began to realize, behavior is really complicated. It's not this simple. Really hard it's really easy to call people bad, much harder to ask why. So, and it's our responsibility to ask why, right? If we want to make the world a better place, if we're really committed to doing that, then we need to know the answers to these questions. And it's very healing when you actually learn that it's not, I believe in free will, but I believe free will is affected if you've had a head injury. Does that make sense?
Or any sort of mental trauma, in my opinion.
Yes. So it was very healing.
That's good to hear. I started writing my book. I wrote a bunch, and then I kind of stopped. So
I'm going to give you this advice. If there are people still alive that you're writing about, brace yourself, be ready. So, and I actually did very much the PG-13 version in my book. It was very much the, family-friendly version because it wasn't very family-friendly. But still, the people who are living, most of them really accepted it and were actually, my uncle who's a heroin addict loved it because he's really owned everything in his past. Not everyone owned everything in their past. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult. Yeah.
The power of owning your past.
Oh, so great. It's so freeing.
Yeah, it is. Like, I messed up. Oh, the power and I messed up. I was wrong.
Yep. Or just, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Ooh.
Those words are so powerful. Yeah.
That can get tricky because it's like, are you just saying sorry because so you should say, or are you gonna do a different behavior, right?
Right. So how much do you really mean it? I agree. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you. It's really powerful to be able to let it go when you're able to face it and go, no one's been judging me more harshly than I've been judging myself.
Yes. So I always talk about the power of apologizing to yourself when you're mean to yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Well, good luck with your
Uh,
mentor. That's awesome. Yeah.
this conversation up to this point, especially when we were talking about the different medications and not how like, you know, Prozac doesn't work for everyone. It's really dependent on your brain, your body, you know, what's going on with you. It really makes me think of all these different Facebook groups that I'm in, or mental health and anxiety Facebook groups. And you see this every day. People post, you know, I'm taking whatever name of medication, I don't know. And it's, have you guys tried this? And it almost seems like there's kind of this conception like, oh, this is the good one. Like I'm trying to find that, you know, that 100%, you know, good one that works for everybody. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to sharing this episode in those groups to kind of.
Well, they don't all work for everybody. And that's what's so
Yeah.
important to know, is because, you know, everybody's brain is different. So I have sleepy frontal lobes. So the thing that's going to work best for me is, if I were going to go on an antidepressant, it's going to be one that's stimulating to the frontal lobes. So something more like Wellbutrin. Well, someone like my daughter who has overactive frontal lobes, she's like a little like borderline, she's not OCD clinically, but she's just very intense. Let's put it that way. Her brain scan showed she has a very busy brain. She does not have sleepy frontal lobes. So Prozac would be the better one for her. It would actually settle down her frontal lobes. But food actually has a huge effect on you as well. So for people with ADD or sleepy frontal lobes, eating something like a protein, high fat, but very high quality, obviously very healthy fat and protein diet is going to stimulate the frontal lobes. It's going to bring
ADD over
yeah.
here.
So that's going to help you. That, like, fat and protein will help you focus. Put my daughter on something like a ketogenic diet, she will literally over focus on every negative thing that ever happened on the entire planet. And she's like anxious. You know, she can't have a diet like that. She needs more smart carbohydrates, because carbohydrates increase serotonin, which settle down frontal lobes. So diet matters. And that's why most of what I've written 9 books on that, on how food affects your health, your hormones, your brain. It matters. Everything you put on the end of your fork matters. Exercise helps too.
Yeah. Same with like we always talk about our tips for self-improvement, and some things work for different people.
Right. And supplements. There are supplements. Everyone thinks, oh, I'm just going to try this one or try that one. Well, guess what? They can do the same thing. If I take something like 5-HTP, which helps increase serotonin, which is what Prozac does, I feel high. I just feel like I can't get anything done during the day. You know, my husband loves it when I take it, because he's like, oh, you're just so mellow. I'm like, I feel like I'm walking through mud. I don't want to be mellow. So.
I've messed with so many of them. I've used HTP, L-theanine, tyrosine, MAC.
If you truly have ADD, you might want to try something a little more stimulating, like maybe some SAMe. That's if you have sleepy frontal lobes. Then something like SAMe will help to stimulate. It also helps with pain.
I'll have to go to Encino and just check, see which one.
We actually have a brain health assessment you can take too at brainhealthassessment.com. It'll literally tell you what type of brain you have. Now, it's the next best thing. We know everyone's not coming in for a scan, but that just helps people understand what's going on in their brain, and it will actually give you suggestions. So dietary suggestions, supplement suggestions, things like that. So you don't take the wrong thing.
Awesome. Yeah, that was going to be my question. Because I'm curious.
Keep me posted. Let me know how that goes.
I will.
So can you tell us a little bit more on the connection? You talked a lot about gut health and that connection to your mental health. And I've heard about this so much on several different podcasts about how important your gut health is. I think people even said it's like your second brain, or maybe it's like this is important or something. But honestly, I haven't taken enough time to really learn about it, but I'd like to know more. So what can you tell us?
So your gut and your brain are directly connected through the vagus nerve, number one. And number two, you about 80 to 90% of the serotonin in your body is made in your gut. So serotonin is your don't worry, be happy neurotransmitter. And you have all kinds of other, hormones and neurotransmitters made in your gut that are necessary for having stable mental health, being happy, feeling settled, feeling motivated. And so if your gut is not healthy, which most people's guts in this society with the SAD, standard American diet, SAD diet, they're not healthy. And so if that happens, or if you've taken certain medications, like anti-inflammatories or birth control or all kinds of medications that deplete, your gut, they actually really affect your gut negatively, then what can happen is that's all of a sudden these neurotransmitters and your hormones are getting messed up. Likewise, you're not actually absorbing nutrients and minerals like you should be. So when that happens, it's going to lead to other problems like mental health problems. That's where depression, anxiety are directly connected to your gut health. So people are sort of surprised when they come into one of our clinics that one of the first things we do is we want to just rehab their diet. And so we want to put them on an elimination diet to figure out what is the culprit. But first of all, also to help heal the gut. So you need some time to help heal the gut. And then we want to figure out which foods serve you and which ones don't. And most people are fairly surprised. They think they eat pretty healthy because they're eating things with health food on the label. Those are the ones you got to watch out for.
Yes, I always say this. And then like those smoothies, like
Yeah,
the Dwala and all
sugar.
those loaded with sugar, and the sugar is so toxic.
Yep. Sugar. I'm so glad you said that because most of your generation just doesn't get it. They just don't get it. And so sugar is just highly toxic. It affects your brain and your focus like directly. It affects mood. Actually, studies have shown that it causes rapid brain cell firing. So people can have anger issues, ADD, all sorts of problems going on. It's really important.
Yeah, there's a documentary called Sugar Coated I watched, and it just broke it down, like the controversy with the guy who was head of health for Harvard, and
Yep. That was amazing. Yeah.
oh my gosh, and it turns out he was paid by the sugar company to say, oh, because it's fat free and it has high sugar, you're good. Just
He
stay
was
away
paid
from
to say that it was fat causing the problems, not sugar.
Yes.
It was the opposite.
Yes, but then like we could only process a certain amount, I think it was 70 grams of sugar a day, and the rest it's turned into fat.
Right.
It says fat free on the label, but it literally turns into fat. So it's
Well,
not.
the worst thing that ever happened to us was the fat-free craze because they filled food full of chemicals and sugar and the chemicals, the trans fats they were putting in them. That's a whole nother, that would take a podcast. That's a whole nother thing. And I've got, oh boy, I've got my beasts are, my beasts are starting to come over, and got my dog, my cat jumping in here. So that's my anti-anxiety. That's my anxiety relief is my animals. But working at home, they decided they're going to join the party here.
So one question we like to ask all our guests: what is a message that you'd like to send out to everybody in the world? So if you had the capability to send everybody a message, what would it be?
So that's a great question. I really like that question. We have found in our clinics, especially right now with everything that's happened with COVID and quarantine, depression has doubled. Anxiety is through the roof. People are angrier with all the social stuff going on and the politics and the news. And, I came to watch the news. And there are people out there, I mean, we know because we're seeing them, they literally don't see life as worth living. They're at this very, very dark point in their lives. And I've been at that dark point in my life where I just thought I was wasting oxygen on the planet. If I could tell people anything, it's that I had no idea what my life would be like now back then. I just thought it was a total waste. And I have this amazing life of purpose and just making a difference in the world and having my best friend as my husband and, incredible kid and just so much going on in my life. I could not possibly have known back then when life wasn't worth living, or so I thought, that I had to go through that. That is my mission now. That is my mission field. That's what I do. So it's pain to purpose. I had no idea that all those things I was going through were preparing me to be able to do what I do now and actually help people. So if I could tell people one thing, it's like, you just hold on. You don't know how this can change and become the thing that is the most important thing to you on the planet as far as helping people.
Yeah, we've said similar things before. Like I remember going through social anxiety in high school, which is like one of the worst times of my life. But it's like one of those things, like I'm so glad I went through that. Like that was so beneficial to me now. And like you said, I never knew I'd be where I am now back then, but I'm glad I went through all that to get to where I am now.
Yep. And look what you're doing. You're making a difference in the world. I mean, you guys are using
Thank
your
you.
skills to help people.
Building the resilience and just the level of depth that I've had or the depthy connections that I've had because of what I've been through. It's immeasurable how awesome, how great it is. Yeah.
And I want to applaud you guys. I mean, you guys are like closer to my daughter's age. I mean, you guys are like so young. But I love what you're doing. The fact that you are willing to get out there, and it makes it okay when the younger generation sees, these young guys that have this cool podcast, and they're not ashamed or worried about talking about what they've been through, and they have all these guests on. It makes it okay for them. It makes it okay. It's like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in the struggle. And I just want to applaud you, for taking your energy to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
For those human beings who are still listening, where can they find you on the social
So
media?
you can find me at TanaAmen.com is my website. That's where you can find a lot of tools and things that I've been talking about. And at Tana Amen is, so TanaAmen is Instagram, and I've got a Facebook page, Tana Amen, RNBSN. So yeah.
Thank you
Would love to have
so
you.
much from the bottom of my heart for coming on.
Oh, no, thank you. It's been a pleasure. You guys are great.